네, 시작하도록 하겠습니다.
So we are now ready to
안녕하십니까.
begin. Good afternoon.
중앙사고수습본부
I am from the
언론대응팀장
Central Disaster Management
이지은입니다.
Headquarters. I
지금부터
am the team head of
코로나 바이러스
press
감염증
relations. My name is
1호
Lee
외신
Jiun.
브리핑을
I would now like to begin
시작하겠습니다.
the joint
오늘
briefing
브리핑은
on the
김강립 중앙재난안전대책본부
for
1
foreign media.
총괄조정관,
Today, the
권준욱
briefing will be
중앙방역대책본부
presented in the following
부본부장,
order. Mr. Kim
이태호
Gang-nip,
외교부
overall
2차관이
coordinator 1
진행합니다.
of Central Disaster and
더불어
Safety Countermeasure
오현주
Headquarters,
식품의약품안전처
권준욱,
의료기기
Deputy
심사부장,
Director General of the
유천권
Central Disease Control Headquarters,
중앙방역대책본부
and then Lee Tae-ho, Second Vice
진단분석관리단장.
Minister of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We also have Ms. Oh Hyun-ju from the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, and then Mr. Yu Cheong-kwon of the Central Disease Control Headquarters, Ms. Kim Yeon-jae from the National Medical Center, and then Mr. Kim Dong-hyun from the Korea Society of Epidemiology. First, Mr. Kim Gang-nip will present Korea Center for Disease Control and Prevention's COVID-19 response measures and future plans, followed by Mr. Kwon Junuk's current status of response to COVID-19 and future plans, and then Second Vice Minister Lee Tae-ho talking about Korea's foreign relations policy regarding COVID-19, and then we will have a Q&A session. At first, I'd like to invite Mr. Kim Gang-nip for the presentation.
Hello, I am Kim Gang-nip, Vice Minister of Health and Welfare. I would like to speak in English today because of all the foreign media.
Good afternoon. Thank you for
네,
coming
안녕하십니까.
to this briefing.
오늘
especially
많은
organized
기자분들께서
for the
와준 것에
members of
대해 감사드립니다.
international media. The briefing is very significant as it
이번
provides an
브리핑은
opportunity
한국의
to explain the
코로나19
current
사태
status of
발생
Korea's
상황과 대응을 설명할 수
COVID-19
있는
outbreak and our
자리가
response
마련이
to it.
되어서 뜻깊게 생각합니다.
The number of confirmed
현재까지
COVID-19 cases in
한국의
Korea
코로나19
is
환자
not
수가
small.
작은 편은 아닙니다.
However, an important aspect of the situation is missed if we simply look at it in numerical terms. In fact, most of the COVID-19 patients are from a single cluster in a single region. Here in Korea, as you all know, COVID-19 infections spread rapidly within a certain religious organization known as the Shincheonji in Daegu. Geographically, therefore, the contagion is mainly concentrated within the city of Daegu and the immediate vicinity. Up until recently, the Korean government has devoted a tremendous amount of its medical testing capabilities on the Daegu area and on Shincheonji members. As a result, we've managed to identify and isolate most of the people who've been infected with the virus in the Daegu community in a short span of time. Moreover, we continue to monitor and control the spread of COVID-19 virus, conducting at least 10,000 diagnostic tests nationwide each day. Initially, the greater than expected rapidity and the scale of the contagion caused some confusion, but now the situation is steadily coming under control. We are seeing success in our effort to stem the spread of this infectious disease. Of all the confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the country to date, 89% are confined to Daegu and Gyeongsangbuk-do province. And 95% of the cases, not counting those still under epidemiological investigation, have been linked to the Shincheonji religious community. As such, the COVID-19 spread in Korea, despite many cases, has been mainly confined to a single cluster in a single geographical region. This has facilitated the public health authorities' task of controlling the contagion. In a moment, I will explain what steps are being taken in great detail. For now, however, suffice it to say that Korea is creating a new system for responding to infectious diseases. The traditional response to an outbreak of contagious disease has stressed the importance of locking down afflicted area and isolating infected victims. Such an approach has had modest effectiveness, but it has such drawbacks as being close-minded, coercive, and inflexible. For these reasons, we have experienced harmful consequences, with democracy being undermined and active public participation in the process being reduced. Korea, as a democratic country, values globalization and a pluralistic society. Therefore, we believe we must transcend the limitation of the conventional approach to fighting infectious disease. For these reasons, Korea is adopting a different model for responding to contagious disease outbreaks. The key tenet of our model can be defined as a dynamic response system for open democratic societies. In this regard, we consider two core values to be important. The first is that public participation must be secured through openness and transparency. The second is to respect creative thinking and use cutting-edge technology to develop the most effective means of responses. Korea's contagious disease response program that I'm now going to introduce has the following characteristics. First, information is disclosed transparently and rapidly. The government is working on various ways to ensure that the information that citizens need to stay safe include detailed explanations. For example, the travel histories of confirmed patients are being made public and briefings are being conducted twice a day. The more transparently and quickly accurate information is provided, the more the people will trust the government. They will act rationally for the good of the community at large. Second, many citizens have respect on open democracy and community spirit, are voluntarily taking part in the COVID-19 response effort. With individuals maintaining good hygiene and giving others ample spaces as part of social distancing, the same preventive effect that would have been expected from a physical lockdown have been achieved. This way, openness is maintained as people can avoid the intrusions on their daily lives that would be imposed by mandatory lockdowns. In the interest of community awareness, the government is covering the financial cost for related testing and treatment instead of saddling individuals with those expenses. The government is also reimbursing medical facilities for losses incurred from imposed quarantines. Third, we are seeking creative solutions, and we are making full use of advanced information technology in this regard. We have come up with some world-class best practices in our fight against the disease. These include drive-through testing stations and epidemiological investigations supported by GPS data. These actions have been a big help in allowing us to maintain an open society while effectively preventing further spread of the disease. Fourth, we are conducting more diagnostic testing faster than any other country in the world. Korea is capable of processing up to 15,000 diagnostic tests a day, and the aggregate number has reached 190,000 already. If medical doctors suspect a COVID-19 case, they can proceed with testing without restriction. Of course, the testing is conducted free of charge. The enormous testing capability allows us to identify patients early and minimize the harmful effect. Indeed, this is the most important means of fending off a contagious disease outbreak. Ironically, the large numbers of confirmed cases in Korea has enabled us to prove our excellent ability to fight the virus. These include our superb diagnostic testing capabilities and thorough epidemiological investigation. Finally, our highly trained, outstanding medical professionals and our top-notch medical institutions are devoted to the task at hand with a sense of mission. The Korean government, through the process of responding to COVID-19 outbreak, is convinced that our model is working effectively. We are now confident that we will overcome COVID-19 while minimizing damage. Those infected with COVID-19 suffer cold-like symptoms. It is highly contagious from the start, and the rate of spread is rapid. Such characteristics render the traditional response to contagious disease ineffective, which stresses the needs for physical lockdown and isolation. That simply delays the timing of the initial entry and subsequently makes blocking the spread difficult. With a transparent and open society as the goal, we'll recommend a response system that blends voluntary public participation with creative application of advanced technology. The world now faces a common threat, COVID-19. Close collaboration through solidarity will enable us to defeat our common enemy. Korea, as a member of the global community, will share our experience and knowledge with the rest of the world. I'd like today's event to be of assistance to other countries who are confronting this issue. Thank you. 감사합니다.
네, 다음으로 권준욱
We have Mr.
중앙방역대책본부
Kwon-junuk, Deputy
부본부장이
Director General of Central
설명하겠습니다.
Disease Control Headquarters.
단상으로
Please come up
나와주십니다.
to the podium.
예.
Good
중앙방역대책본부
afternoon.
부본부장
I am Kwon-junuk,
권준욱입니다.
Deputy Director General of Central Disease
우리
Control Headquarters.
대한민국의 코로나19
And
관련
today, I would like to talk about some of the policy measures that we have in response to COVID-19. First, I would like to go through the PowerPoint slides that we have prepared. The first slide, if you can please take a look. So on December 31st last year, the Chinese government authority, China National Health Commission, announced a case of pneumonia where the causes could not be identified. And then on January 3rd, the alert level was announced in Korea. That is the first level in regards to such threats. And then on January 19th, the first case of COVID-19 was confirmed in Korea. It was a female of Chinese national, age 35. And on January 20th, the alert level was raised to alert level 2. Since the alert level was escalated to 3, and there were increased cases of patients coming from outside of Korea. And then there were secondary and tertiary infections on January 3rd and January 31st, respectively. And there was a announcement on the global situation of the COVID-19. And the entry ban from China was then imposed. And then on February 12th, that was expanded to Hong Kong and Macau as well. So the entry ban from China was imposed on February 4th and then expanded to Hong Kong and Macau on February 12th. And then a cluster infection began from February 19th. And then on February 23rd, the level was raised to its highest level. Please move on to the next slide. So if you look at the total number of confirmed cases, we are announcing the daily numbers. And just mentioned by my predecessor, we have 2 briefings every day. And as of midnight, March 9th, the accumulated total cases is 7,134. And today, 248 new cases were added. And 166 cases were released and discharged. So February 18th was the date of the 31st case. And before that, there was some sporadic entry of the foreigners coming into Korea with the virus. And since that date, the local infection numbers have been increasing quite significantly. Next, you can see the distribution of age and also some more data regarding the death of the patients. On the left, you see the age and sex distribution of the patients. The male takes up 38% and female 62%. So it's about 4-1 women to men. And then 4-6, sorry. And then you see the fatality rates on the right. It's 0.7%. Men 1.1% and then women 0.4%. And you can see that the fatality rate is high for those above 80. That's 6.5%. Next slide shows the regional distribution of the patients. Per region, there is the Shincheonji religious group linked region, that is Daegu, and then North Gyeongsang province. And those 2 regions take up 90% of total cases. And especially Daegu takes up 75% of the total number of cases. On the right, you see the pie chart. So regardless of the region, overall, 63% of the cases are Shincheonji related. And we have the non-Shincheonji colored in orange. And as we continue our epidemiological investigations, that non-Shincheonji segment can increase. Next, we have the framework for the policies that we have in Korea. First, the quarantine and infection control system. So currently, the alert level is at its highest, and the Prime Minister is currently leading the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters. And in the previous stage, the Minister of Health and Welfare led these efforts. And then in the previous level, it was led by the head of the KCDC. It is not that the leadership has changed. As to the infection control, the head of the Central Disease Control Headquarters have been maintaining that role.
흔들림 없이
So the leadership has not been changed, but it has expanded to further strengthen government cooperation.
두 번째 위기 소통
Second,
캠페인 그리고 정보 공개를
regarding the risk communication campaign and disclosure of information,
즉각적이고도 투명한
so immediate
정보 공개.
and transparent disclosure of information is regarded important, and also providing convenient counseling services through phone and using the public health centers throughout the country. We are providing information and also implementing campaigns to the public. Campaigns highlight the importance of personal hygiene and also maintaining social distance. So we are actively campaigning the most important aspects at each stage.
마지막에 있는 대로
And
정부에서는
lastly,
국민들의 행동 수칙을
we are also issuing and
자세하고도 명확한
highlighting the
수칙을
importance of
계속
code of
반복해서
conduct
알려드리고
to the public.
있습니다. 대책 중에 첫 번째로
So of the public health responses, the first one,
코로나19의 국내 유입 차단을
entry
위해서
prevention of COVID-19.
후베이
So as mentioned earlier,
14일 이상 체제했던 외국인에 대해서
so foreigners
입국이 금지된
who
조치가
have
2월
been
4일
in
시행됐고,
Hubei,
동시에
the entry
2월
ban for
4일에
them happened on
입국
February
관리가
4th.
시행됐습니다.
Yes, and we have been strengthening and implementing special immigration procedures since.
의료기관에서
And
내원하는
also,
환자에 대해서
patients coming
현재
into
총
hospitals,
8개국의
total
여행 이력을
8
확인할 수
countries.
있는
We are checking the travel
COVID-19
history.
R이라는
So we call it DUR system. We're operating the DUR system. So China, Japan,
최근에 유행이
and
증가하고 있는
recently
이란,
Iran
이탈리아를
and
포함한
Italy
8개국의
as well.
여행력을
So we are
진료 중에
checking
확인할 수 있도록 하고
the travel history of total of 8 countries during the
두 번째로
interviews with the doctors.
조기 발견과
And then
차단을
second,
위해서
to detect early and prevent the spread of virus. If there is a case incurred, then we implement epidemiological investigations, and the immediate response team would be dispatched on site to check the patient's whereabouts. And for those that are considered meaningful, we will be disclosing that information. So in 2015, we had guidelines for mayors, and it is based on the Infection Diseases Prevention Act. And based on the act, we look at the CCTV, the mobile phone records, we look at all of the available data so that we can disclose the meaningful whereabouts of the cases. And in that process, we also identify the contacts so that those contacts can be self-isolated. And as to the locations, we are implementing disinfection. And all of these are based on legal acts, and they will also include provisions on penalizing those who do not adhere to this. In addition, Korea, I will be going into detail in the next slide, but from early on, we have been expanding significantly the number of diagnostic testing so that we can detect the cases early on. Also, in such times, so Korea experienced MERS a couple of years ago, so the medical institutions understand the importance of making sure that they play their role. So if patients that are experiencing fevers or if patients go to hospitals randomly when they have symptoms, it can cause a widespread infection within those medical institutions. So we have designated hospitals and we have a system where the suspected cases can go to the testing sites or specifically designated hospitals for their screening. And also mentioned by Mr. Kim earlier, we have the drive-through testing system, and we have mobile facilities and also door-to-door visits for specimen collection. And additionally, for so that we can detect evidence for regional infection early on, we have been conducting tests for patients with pneumonia. Then moving on to number 4, treatment of COVID-19 patients. So as mentioned earlier, it is very important that the medical institutions can continue to play their role. So we want the patients to refrain from going to any hospital when they have symptoms because it can paralyze the overall medical and hospital system. So we have been classifying patients. So symptomless patients, and then mild, moderate, severe, and extremely severe to these different stages so that the physicians and the medical experts can make the appropriate classification and transfer those patients to the appropriate medical institution. And in this process, the negative pressure units or medical institutions that can hospitalize more severe cases, the National Medical Center is coordinating such communication. And when we had unlike the influenza in 2009, we do not have any vaccines or treatment medicine for COVID-19. So there are some antivirals that needs to be tested and go through clinical investigations. So we have that system in place. So we have the Ebola treatment and also the Caletra as well. And including this, we have 4 types of medicines, and we are also considering importing additional medicine as well. So such clinical testing and R&D is also something we are preparing at the moment. And then going to number 5, treatment of non-COVID-19 patients. So we have the public relief hospital system in place. There are 254 such hospitals nationwide, so that the citizens of Korea can feel safe and visit these hospitals if they need it. And there are areas within the hospital that would treat respiratory patients exclusively, and there are areas in the hospital that treat non-respiratory patients. And in Korea, remote medical service is not available at the moment, but currently, as an exception, we are allowing phone prescriptions or prescriptions using other methods. And in order to prevent the infections within medical institutions, we have also issued guidelines to prevent that from happening. And then number 6, resource support. So we have set up living and treatment support centers. So mild cases will be allocated to living and treatment support centers rather than medical institutions. And we feel that that is more effective, and that was coming from the medical experts, and we decided to reflect their opinions. So there are 87 such centers, and in Daegu, there are already more than 2,000 rooms in more than 200 such centers. And also, we need to secure the healthcare professionals. So 750 public health doctors were appointed early on so that they can be dispatched to these regions. And for the personal protective equipment as well, based on the guidelines, the criteria for when and for what type of cases these gear can be used is established clearly. Moving on to the next slide, we have some data on specifically Daegu and Gyeongbuk province. And I will be continuously mentioning Shincheonji. So February 18th is when case number 31 was identified. And it started the cluster infection within Shincheonji, which was a large religious group. Also, the Daenam hospital, we were able to identify a cluster case there. So in addition to Shincheonji, we have the list of the total members of the Shincheonji at Daegu, and we also imposed measures on Daenam hospital as well. And in the process, the fatality rate and the infection rate of COVID-19 was better understood, and we learned that it could rapid very quickly. And so we started the testing on all of the mental hospitals in Korea, and we also started the social distance maintaining campaign as well.
밀접한 거리에서 전파되는
And in the
코로나19의
process,
특성상
COVID-19 can spread very quickly in enclosed areas. So nursing homes, social welfare facilities, we found were vulnerable, and we are continuing our monitoring and control in these type of institutions, and also implementing prevention measures. Schools, we postponed the opening of the school semester so that we can continue to maintain social distance.
점을 특별히 말씀드립니다.
So I would like to highlight three aspects.
진단 제재와 관련해서는
Regarding to the diagnosis,
질병관리본부에서
the KCDC,
작년 12월에
in December last year, we coincidentally, the tabletop exercise was conducted on COVID-19.
중국에서
And at that time,
코로나 바이러스 중에
the
한 종류의 코로나19의 유행이
Corona
시작이 되면서
19 started to become more popular in China.
1월 11일 날
And on January 11th, we prepared so that the testing can begin in January 11th.
유입 환자
The virus isolation happened on February 4th, but there were multiple entries coming into Korea, so we were able to secure the blood samples. So we have the second stage here. We were able to conduct and establish the real-time RT-PCR on January 31st. And in the province and city level institutions, we could start operation of the real-time RT-PCR, not just on government institutions, but also private institutions as well. And we have expanded to include all the private institutions as well.
다음 슬라이드
Moving on to the next slide,
규모가 나와요.
it has the number of the total number of testing. So as you can see
7개 기관이
here,
코로나19에
on the
대한
bottom line,
리얼타임 RT-PCR이
the real-time RT-PCR can be conducted by a total of 117 institutions. The daily testing numbers are expanding, and on the top right corner, on average, we can test up to 12,000 per day,
역량은
and our maximum capacity would be 20,000 per day.
검사에 소요되는 시간은
The turnaround time,
가거물의 이송이라든지 여러 가지
so given the transport and all of those type of issues, 6 hours, and by latest 24 hours.
약 19만 건의
So currently, we have conducted around 190,000 cases,
확인을 하는데 주기에
and this has helped us significantly in detecting cases early.
앞서 부부장께서
And next, we have the self-diagnosis app, and the quarantine and special immigration framework is as follows. So when they land, there is the quarantine process beginning, and in the special immigration process, the passengers have to install the self-diagnosis app. You can see in red. And every day, for the 14-day incubation period using that app, that person has to submit their health-related information. And if that is not submitted for 2 consecutive days, then the post-management process begins.
그 다음에 보시는 것이
And on the next page,
진단 앱의 모양입니다.
you see how the interface looks.
7일부터 적용이 됐고
So this started on March 7th. This is the self-isolation app, and more than 6,000 installations happened. 60,000. More than 60,000 installations happened. So if the self-isolation app is not installed, we would check through phones and other measures. So if the self-isolation app is installed, the response rate is more than 90%. So actually, a large number of people who have downloaded this app are using it effectively. And more than 400 cases, 400 people reported symptoms, and out of the 487 we thought were meaningful, we conducted tests. Fortunately, we do not have any confirmed cases up to point. And I think this shows the ideal way of managing this from outside into Korea. We are not blocking or implementing any travel bans universally. But we are using such apps to effectively, nevertheless, control this infection.
발견하기 위해서 선별 진료소
And
등에서
these are some pictures of the screening clinics so that we can effectively and efficiently conduct the tests. We sometimes go and visit the suspected cases, and we also have drive-through screening clinics as well. If you use the drive-through screening clinics, it happens more rapidly and it's also more safe as well. So total 180,000 cases of testing, and drive-through is one important pillar of the tests. There are about 50 drive-through stations at the moment, and it takes about 10 minutes per case. So at a screening site, there is specimen collection that happens. And normally at these on-site screening sites, it takes about 1 hour for the specimen collection. But in this drive-through, it only takes 10 minutes, so we can conduct around 6 sample collections every hour. So that would be an overview of our infection control measures. And currently the government is designating special management areas in Daegu, Cheongdo, and Gyeongbuk province. And these are the regions where the WHO is saying that there are some regions that need further attention. And other than these cluster sites, we see some sporadic cluster infections, but we are highlighting all of our efforts so that those sporadic sites do not become nationwide infections. Thank you.
네, 마지막으로 이태호
And lastly, we have the Vice Minister Lee Tae-ho.
단상 위로 나와 주시기 바랍니다.
Please come up to the podium.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My colleagues from the Ministry of Health and Welfare and the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have just provided you with a comprehensive briefing on the current situation of COVID-19 in Korea and the robust and innovative measures we are taking to contain the COVID-19. On my part, I would like to highlight certain notable points of the responses my government is taking, focusing on Korea's external relations with other countries in dealing with this health emergency. Before starting my remarks, I would like to note that many of you present here covered the COVID-19 situation in Korea and provided a fair assessment of the Korean government's responses. I thank you very much for that. As you have just heard, we have mobilized not only our scientific and technological resources, but delved into innovative tools as well. Korea has the best diagnostic capability by far, testing up to 15,000 cases per day, as we have heard. We have been innovative in pioneering tools such as drive-through testing stations and smartphone applications to support our efforts. More importantly, my government has remained in combat with the COVID-19 while trying to avoid interrupting the ordinary daily life of people. We have shared with the public, both domestic and international, information on every development on the situation, as well as every policy direction and actions that my government takes with utmost openness and transparency from the very beginning. This is what Vice Minister Kim called a dynamic response system for open democratic societies. We are firm in our belief that public health challenges can only be overcome with public trust in our efforts, and that public trust can only be earned and harnessed through full openness and transparency. A recent study that analyzed worldwide epidemics since the 1960s came to the conclusion that adopting fact-based policymaking and sharing information with the public is the best strategy. As this is precisely the path my government has taken, there is a deep and wide public confidence in our diagnostic capabilities and quality of healthcare. This public trust has resulted in a very high level of civic awareness and voluntary cooperation that strengthens our collective efforts to overcome this public health emergency. Ladies and gentlemen, as Vice Minister Kim reiterated, the Korean government is in full cognizance of the importance of our strict adherence to the principles of openness and transparency. This feature of the Korean government's domestic response posture is reflected like a mirror image in its response to Korea's external interactions with other countries during the course of dealing with this health emergency. In this global age, where people travel freely, things move across borders, and we prosper because of it, the consensus among public health professionals seems to be that travel bans are not effective in containing contagious illnesses and can make things worse, even by fueling a sense of complacency. The WHO also repeatedly says, based on past experience and evidence, that restricting the movement of people and goods during public health emergencies is ineffective in most situations and may divert resources from other interventions. The WHO therefore recommends that any measures in relation to international traffic that significantly interfere with the movement of people and goods during public health emergencies need to be proportionate to the public health risk and be short in duration and be reconsidered regularly as the situation evolves. The Korean government has taken this path from the very beginning. Despite the public pressures that called for stronger measures to restrict the influx of travelers into Korea, my government has not introduced any entry ban on inbound travelers, except those traveling from only a single most severely affected area in China. By introducing instead the special entry procedure aimed at enhanced health monitoring of travelers coming from certain areas and countries with higher risks, the Korean government was able to avoid an outright entry ban while minimizing the risk of expansion of disease. Maintaining this policy has been, of course, a daunting challenge, but the Korean government is determined to continue to comply with WTO recommendations with full confidence that it is the right way to follow. Despite the WTO's recommendations, travelers leaving from Korea or a certain part of the Korean territory are now facing some form of entry bans from more than 40 countries. I would like to emphasize that any travel restrictions on travelers from Korea should be commensurate with the facts, not based on a vague fear. In this context, please allow me to point out 3 facts here. 1, as Vice Minister Kim said, intensive tests are being undertaken for a certain target group of people in specified regional areas. When you spread the number of this testing to the wide nationwide average, 1 out of every 250 Korean people has been tested. 1 out of every 250 people. Paradoxically, as pointed out earlier, this high number of confirmed cases is the testament of the Korean government's thorough and rapid diagnostic screening. Second, the high level of public trust and civic awareness that has resulted in widespread voluntary self-containment, self-quarantine, and other preventive measures like social distancing is effectively slowing the spread of the outbreak. Third, the possible outflow from Korea of COVID-19 is strictly controlled. Individuals identified as close contacts of confirmed cases are not allowed to go abroad. Also, we are making the Incheon International Airport into a COVID-19 free zone and have made mandatory multi-step fever checks on all outbound passengers. Considering these points and other facts, I believe that the restrictive measures that have been imposed on people traveling from Korea requires careful reconsideration and warrant lifting. I would like to urge once again, by taking advantage of this opportunity, countries imposing restrictions on travelers from Korea to review the facts of the situation in Korea and reconsider their measures. The WHO has shown continued trust in Korea's emergency response capability and its public health measures since the early stages of the outbreak. Recently, both the American and European chambers of commerce have made clear through their press briefings and releases that they are in full support of my government's response efforts and a high degree of transparency with full information disclosure. I sincerely hope that the members of the media present here today will be the eyes and ears of the COVID-19 situation in Korea and look not only at the rising number of the confirmed cases, but also look at what lies behind these numbers. Ladies and gentlemen, with the global spread of the virus seemingly underway, the situation calls for heightened international communication and cooperation in health security. We needed to guard not only against the spread of the virus, but also fear, discrimination, and isolation, all of which may strain our core values of free and open democracy. We all share the grave challenge to contain and control this epidemic and minimize its overreaching impact on our way of lives. In so doing, we hopefully shall not leave lasting scars on the spirit of free trade and movement of people, which is the basis of our shared prosperity. Thank you very much.
네, 지금부터 질의응답 시간을
So
가지도록
I would now like to
하겠습니다.
begin the Q&A session. So we will remain seated for the Q&A session. We have a journalist from many different countries and many different media organizations. So I would like to ask for your cooperation so we can distribute the questions more evenly. So we have many journalists here with us. So I ask to limit your questions to 2 questions. And so we have simultaneous interpretation being provided at the moment. So I ask you to please speak slowly and please direct your question to a specific person. And if you raise your hand, if I point to you, please state the media that you represent and also your name as well. And this goes the same for the panelists who are answering the questions. I would like to ask you your understanding so that on the journalist on the right side of the podium and then journalists on the left side of the podium, each 3 questions. 3 journalists will get some questions. And so on the right, we'll start from that side as well. So we will get questions from 3 journalists. So please raise your hand. Yes.
Mr. Goddard, German press agency. I have a question to an epidemiologist. I think you are an expert. First, from the beginning, when we look at the beginning of the outbreak, do you think that the South Korean government reacted in a timely and appropriate manner, or did the government learn in the process how to deal with that? And do you think, or do you have an assessment of the dark number, undisclosed cases of SARS-CoV-2 viruses, infections? Thank you.
네,
So thank you for the question. And I understand a little bit of English. I also listen to Korean, so it's a little bit difficult for me to balance that out at the moment. So again, thank you for your question. We have a representation from government ministries here today, and so I think the presentations until now focused on some of the messages that the government wanted to convey. And in those presentations, I think there were some mentioning of success. And regarding that success aspect, it's difficult for me to agree to that. Because I think it's too early on to assess whether we have been successful or not. Including Korea, even China, we say that when we say that control outbreak is successful, I think it's too early to tell. And regarding COVID-19, we're still in a learning process. That's about already 3 months has passed. And from those 3 months experience, I think it's too early to assess the results on the efforts that have made in just 3 months. What we have learned up till now, this COVID-19 is a very smart virus. So it means that it is very difficult to manage or control the virus. And I think this you already know. Many countries, including China, are already experiencing that in the early stages of the virus. And also, even the period where the case or the patient does not realize any symptoms, or during the asymmetric pace, the virus is spreading very quickly, even in those stages. So the widespread prevention in community is very difficult. And so that's like the overall situation. And if we come back to what's happening in Korea, when we had case 31 of the Shincheonji church, so until that happened, containment strategy, I think, was more effective. Case isolation, tracing, quarantine, I think it was quite successful until that point. But the Shincheonji incident was unpredictable. Nobody could have expected that to happen. It's not just about a particular religious group. So it's a little bit outside of the conventional religion, and it made it more difficult for us to predict that from happening. And it's still having its ripple effect today. And the Korean government authorities have worked very closely with the medical industry, the medical field. All of the health authorities have been striving to prevent that from spreading nationwide. In the process, there have been some issues that were raised. And if we can share that experience today, I think it can help Italy or Japan or any other country that are experiencing a surge of the number of confirmed cases. And it's not difficult to give you really detailed information on that here, but the core cluster related to Shincheonji, even if we exclude that in Korea, the community transmission in Korea is in progress. And many of them, we cannot identify the epidemiological links. So I think we have gone beyond the stage where we can control through containment. I think now we are entering the mitigation strategy stage. And in this stage, the most important aspect is minimizing health damage to the patients. And to achieve this, we need to make sure that the medical resources are distributed appropriately. But because we had sudden surge of confirmed cases in limited region, Daegu, in that there were some difficulties in preparing for that medical resource allocation. And in that process, maybe there were cases of deaths that could have been avoided. And another aspect is that for the long-term care facilities, the nursing homes, these type of facilities, if we look at the medical facilities there are nursing homes rather than medical institutions. And the elderly people are usually in those type of facilities. And because of this age characteristic, there have been cases of deaths that have occurred in these type of facilities. And it's very difficult to block the virus from entering those long-term care facilities. And the outbreak through long-term facilities, I think, will happen in other countries as well. And how to respond to this type of potential, I think, is very important strategy that needs to be developed by other countries because we know it's coming. And it may depend on the medical system of that particular country. And then second, because we cannot identify epidemiological links in many of the cases, that is why we have come up with a strategy such as social distancing. So that is the mitigation strategy. And we are making efforts to do that. In China, they locked down Wuhan. So it was quite radical measure that was imposed, but in a free democratic country, we cannot really impose the same strong measures. So we need voluntary participation of the citizens and the government guidelines and government efforts as well. And that is happening in Korea at the moment, but it is not easy to ensure that all of this is implemented. So for countries that are currently in the early stage of the spread of the virus, I think there may be some clusters or certain areas that I think it's important for them to continue the risk dialogue with them. And I think it is better that you start this type of dialogue early on. For us, it's still a challenging task for us. So that's another, I think, key important aspect that other countries can refer to. So I can talk a lot more, but I think I will conclude here.
답변이 저 마이크를 사용해 주시기 바랍니다.
그러니까 저희가 지금 아까 이제 저희 그 정부 고위 관계자분들 다 말씀하셨죠.
So it was mentioned by the government officials during their presentations and briefings. But starting from the containment phase, and then we had the Shincheonji core cluster surge, even in that type of environment, we tried to implement case isolation and case tracking, and this was done in a very aggressive manner by the authorities. So even with Shincheonji followers who did not show any symptoms, we conducted the screening. And many of them, we were able to identify the confirmed cases early on. So we were able to prevent the asymptomatic patients early on, and I think that was effective. So if you look at Japan or China or some other countries, compared to some other countries, case finding I think was very successful in Korea. So that is why we could put in the denominator mild cases and also asymptomatic cases as well. And because of active surveillance, the denominator increased significantly, but that brings down the fatality rate. But in the current situation, the case fatality rates, I don't think that that number is an indicator on comparing the situation of coronavirus in different countries at the moment. It's too early. And I think that we were able to identify almost all of the cases in Korea. That includes mild cases and also asymptomatic cases as well. So on that side, I think the situation in Korea is quite exceptional. And then that also allowed us to collect extensive data. And if we can analyze that data, I think it can help and contribute to other countries develop their quarantine and infection control policies.
다음 질문을 받도록 하겠습니다.
Next question, please. Excuse us, but please, we would like to ask for you to keep the questions short because we have about 1 hour for Q&A, and we would like to give as many journalists a chance for a question. So from my side, we will have 2 more questions from my left. Please raise your hand.
This question is for the director of the KCDC. How do you ensure that the personal information of the patients, which you are publicly detailing, travel routes, for example, how do you ensure that their privacy is respected?
예. 아까 이미
Yes, we did mention during our presentation, but even with the MERS outbreak, we do have the Infection Prevention Act, and the disclosure of information is the responsibility of the Ministry of Health and Welfare. So for high-risk individuals, they actually have to disclose their travel routes, and they actually acknowledge that. So we would like to find out initially any of more confirmed cases who fell in line with the travel routes. Of course, there could be issues such as personal privacy, but it's not just related to one person, but this is based on the law. And in the process, we are also using CCTVs and usage of credit cards and tracking their routes as well. On this aspect, in the containment phase, it's very meaningful and it's very significant in helping out with preventing the spread of the virus. But after the spread has progressed somewhat, the disclosure of personal information may not be as effective as the initial stages. So later on, when we do our assessment and evaluation, we will look over the importance of revealing the information.
저 사전에 신청.
Yeah, on the second row.
Thank you. I'm Andres Sanchez from the Spanish news agency. I have a couple of questions for Mr. Kwon from the KCDC. The first would be if there's any figure as of today of more or less the number of patients awaiting to be hospitalized in Daegu and Gyeongbuk. And also I'd like to know if the ministry right now has any assessment on, let's say, the level of hospital saturation in this particular region. Thank you.
지금 현재 대구 경북의
For in Daegu and Gyeongbuk province, we are continually expanding the living and treatment support centers. And not only in Daegu, but nationwide, the National Medical Center is coordinating the hospital transfers so that we can make use of all of the hospital beds that we have nationwide. But it took some time to prepare that system. And the Sincheonji incident was, of course, not expected, so there was some confusion when it first happened. So the number of those that are in standby is decreasing, but as of yesterday, there were more than 2,000. But within the 2,000, there are mild centers, mild patients that needs to go to the centers, and for the more severe cases, we have them on our top priority list so that they can be hospitalized as soon as possible. As to the hospital saturations, the 3 more severe classifications the government designated hospitals, meaning the negative pressure units and the coronavirus dedicated hospitals, we have some beds that we have secured. So as to the hospital saturation, I think we are very robustly prepared. And this situation, I think, for example, the Japanese cruise case, and then in U.S. there is another cruise case that is unfolding. And if you compare the Shincheonji case with them, it's even more difficult than the cruise case because in a cruise, you know who is there. You can confirm the identify, and you can identify the high-risk suspected cases that because they are all in the cruise. So, but nevertheless, they still, when they were dealing with the cruise ships, those advanced countries faced some difficulties in managing that. But in Shincheonji, it's a little bit different. It's more random, and it's very difficult to identify all the whereabouts and the dynamics of how this is going to unfold. Especially, it's very closely linked to community. And so how the government is going to react to such cases, especially how the medical system is established. And in any country in the world, you cannot hospitalize every single confirmed case. And in Korea, the number of beds per person in Korea is one of the highest in the world. But still, we face some issues in trying to secure the beds. But I think that would suffice your answer.
오른편에서 질문 받도록
And now from my right, we have 4 hands up.
순서대로 진행하고 다음
So we will proceed in the order. Hello, I am Kim Hyung-eun from BBC Korea. First of all, to Mr. Kim Dong-hyun, you mentioned that 80% is from a single cluster. In order to prevent this kind of contamination or infection in clusters, I think a lot of countries might be interested in this. So what is the key to preventing the spread in clusters? And for specialist Mr. Kim Yeon-jae, there's a big gap between males and females, so what's the significance of these figures? As you mentioned, this kind of infection in clusters, for example, like the Shincheonji church members, or from mass gatherings, or in special institutions, or hospitals or centers. I don't think that there is a quick solution to this. We are stressing the importance of social distancing and to prevent any mass gatherings. And the government and municipalities are stressing the importance of this, but nevertheless, a lot of religious groups and mass gatherings are taking place. And in one aspect, one of the biggest challenges is such as senior healthcare centers and long-term care facilities that are getting infected, and in hospital infections as well. As for hospitals, for patients with respiratory diseases, we have a separate treatment, or we have separate routes to treat these patients, and they're separated from the others. I think from the Bundang Seoul National University Hospital, I think we could see that it was not very easy. And for those care centers, the management of these care centers are twofold. First of all, for pneumonia patients, if you have a large number of pneumonia patients or high-risk patients, I think you have to transfer them to other facilities because those long-term care centers are difficult to treat these high-risk patients. So some municipalities are practicing a lockdown of these centers. And even with the staff, they are contained inside. But in order to actually implement this is a big challenge. It's very difficult to do. So with the surge of patients in Korea, we have severe to highly severe patients and fatalities as well. For those patients who escalate to severe or fatalities, I think that they have underlying diseases. Related to the gap between male and female, I don't think that there are any biological factors, and we don't have enough samples in order to understand this change. But we have a very similar trend with Chinese patients because the higher age is more prone to fatalities and severity.
Andrew Salmon, Asia Times. My question's for Mr. Kim on the left or the gentleman on the right, please. You've got a very, very high infection rate, but a very, very low fatality rate here in Korea. Could you speculate on why that may be? And could you possibly address, is this due to the young age of the Shincheonji members? Are you testing a lot of false positives? Are you anticipating a surge in your death rate? Is it due to you've got very good care and treatment, or is it sort of even the kimchi theory that Koreans eat a lot of garlic and immune system boosting foods? Why the low death rate despite the high infection rate? Thank you.
So this is my personal opinion. In Korea, early on, when the hospitalizations were happening, the period from being confirmed to hospitalization was very short. So mild cases were hospitalized. And if you look at the population distribution compared to China, we have higher portion of younger age groups. So I think this also has an impact on the fatality rate. And however, like Mr. Kim mentioned earlier, there are some nursing homes, long-term care facilities that house patients with chronic diseases. And if there are more patients coming from these type of facilities, the fatality rate can increase. But up till now, we are able to detect the patients early on and treat them from the early stage. So I think that brought down the fatality rate. And I would just like to add to that. And like mentioned earlier, at the current stage, the high or low fatality rate, I don't think really is an appropriate indicator to depict the situation or to compare different countries. And like mentioned just now, the age distribution in Korea of the confirmed cases, you see high portion of those in their 20s and 30s, and this is because of the Shincheonji aspect, because there are many young members in the Shincheonji. And so they are young, their parents are young, and therefore the fatality rate in this cohort is low. And I think we need to standardize the age or look at the fatality rates for each age group to better have an apples-to-apples comparison. Nevertheless, the fatality rate in the 70s and the 80s age group compared to China, Japan, and Italy is still lower in Korea. And I think this is thanks to early detection and the consequent early treatment. So that is what our thoughts are at the moment. And we were able to detect cases without symptoms as well that are included in the denominator that further brings down the fatality rate. Having said that, when there is a sudden surge of confirmed cases, and then when we have these clusters in long-term care facilities, because the appropriate medical service were not provided at a timely manner in these long-term facilities, I think that brought the fatality rates higher in those institutions. So it would have been lower if we could provide better medical service there.
Yes, our third question. Hello, I'm Cha Sang-mi from Reuters. I would like to deliver my first question to Mr. Kwon Junuk. If you think about the epidemiological investigation and the travel routes of confirmed cases, we are disclosing them right now, but related to the hospital cohorts, I can understand. But if you think about the apartment complexes being isolated, I would like to look at the infringement of personal privacy and personal human rights. And for Mr. Yu Chun-kwon, compared to Italy, in terms of diagnostic testing, what relatively speaking, did we do better than Italy? Yes, related to your first question, there are some external effects, and the same for vaccinations and mandatory isolation for hospitalization. I think we do have legal grounds to do so. And for this case, Daegu and the Shincheonji members are focused in this area, so that's why there was a certain surge in the confirmed cases. That's why we did a cohort isolation. The expression was isolation, but it was a means in order to prevent the spreading within the same cohort. So rather than an infringement on human rights, I believe that it was a prevention of the epidemics. So when we take these measures, we have to have legal grounds and the right basis. And since there were so many confirmed cases in that region, that is why we took those drastic measures. Yes, related to the diagnostic testing, I think that we had a trial and error phase after MERS. And once there is such an epidemic, one of the major things that we need to do is the testing. And testing, depending on the capacity of the country, is actually you can seek synergy with the voluntary participation of the public. And this case, it was not just the KCDC, but also cooperation and collaboration with the medical circles and the professionals in diagnostic testing participated, and we spread this out into the public. And making the diagnostic testing kits, we were able to make many of them along with the participation of the public. And in order to make this a smooth progress, the testing results are also done on a conservative basis. The professionals actually read the tests and the results, and with an inconclusive result, the KCDC reviews the tests. So that, I think, is why we were faster and more reliable than other countries in the diagnostic testing.
So the next question, I think we're going to move on to the right to the podium. So those who have not asked questions yet, you may raise your hand. So I see three hands. We'll start from the lady in the front. Yes, so those who just raised your hands will all receive questions later on.
Hello, my name is Katharina Peters from Der Spiegel in Germany. My question is, you spoke a lot about the reaction to this coronavirus. How well was Korea prepared in comparison to other countries?
So from the health authorities, the quarantine authorities in Korea, if we just talk about the kids, so December last year already, we were training for this coronavirus. It was coincidental, but nevertheless it happened. And so we were able to kind of prepare for any epidemic of the coronavirus. And so we still find a shortfall, but we still are securing additional health staff, and we have been continuously developing systems within the government to better equip and prepare ourselves for such epidemics. And I think earlier there was a question on whether there was any unidentified or undisclosed information in Korea. That was a question directed to Mr. Kim earlier, also from Germany. But our medical system and insurance system is extremely transparent. And even the Corona-19 kit in US dollars, the full test is about 130 US dollars. And around half is covered by the national health insurance and the other half by the individual. And for the individual, at the end of the day, it is also covered by the central government later on as well. So such type of system could be implemented very quickly. And also, at the end of the day, this is free for the patient. And so there's no reason for the suspected case to hide their symptoms. It's free of charge, so they are more active in going to these selective or hospitals or testing sites to make sure that they are safe. And another aspect that I would like to highlight is the medical system, like the Shincheonji cluster case. So in other countries, I used the example of cruises, but it can be contagious. It could spread very quickly, and when it occurs, that were not within our expectations. Even in Korea, where the medical system is very well developed, there can be some shortfalls or lack of resources to respond to these type of occurrences. Even if we talk about the protective gears, we did a lot of training. We had a lot of video courses as well. But when the actually incident occurs, we felt that we could have been even better prepared and better trained. And for the R&D as well, SARS and MERS, after those two pandemics, it's a global, I think, common challenge. But the coronavirus, such cases can happen anytime. And if we had better kind of anticipation that such things can happen, I think we could have done better in preparing ourselves. But as this progresses, I think we will be looking back to make sure what we have done good and what we could have done better.
And the journalist in the third row, please, your question.
My name is Irina Yu. I'm from New Times Magazine, Russia. So I have two kind of questions. First question is, what is the number of foreigners who are infected in Korea, and what is the breakdown by countries? And second question is, what is the process of vaccine development and in Korea, and who is developing it and how, and a little bit more about treatments. Thank you.
저 외국인은 한국에 계신
So are you talking about the foreigners in Korea?
예, 확진자 중에 외국인 수
Yes, foreigners among the confirmed cases. I don't think I have the figures right now, but it was around 40 and over 30 from China. And I will get back to you once I check the exact figures. For vaccine development for COVID-19, a lot of the institutions are looking at DNA and RNA vaccines, and we do have collaborations with multinational pharmaceuticals, and we're now in the early stages of vaccine development. But in order to develop vaccines, we have to have confirmed animal cases as well as 3 clinical studies.
또한 그 효과를 또 검증해야
And we also have to verify the effects. And if there are any variations in the virus, we also have to be on top of that. So that is why it is very difficult to develop vaccines. And it's not just the sole efforts of Korea, but it's also a collaboration with other countries and pharmaceuticals. And the government will continue to support financially. Related to the foreigners who are confirmed cases, we have a total of 47 from March 8th. Chinese amounts to 31, from the US 5 cases, from Mongolia 2, Vietnam 2, Australia 2, Malaysia, Argentina, Uzbekistan, Japan, each 1. Thank you.
장제니퍼 프레스 TV 서울 특파원인데요. 여기
So I have a question for Mr. Kwon from KCDC. The coronavirus, I understand that is popular in autumn and winter, and then it can quiet down in spring and summer. Yesterday, the number of confirmed cases went down quite significantly, and today it's on an upward trend again. But the weather is actually warmer today. So does the weather play a factor in the spread of the virus? As we go into spring and summer, will it get better?
질병관리본부장이 아니고 국립보건연구원장이라는 점 말씀드리고요. 말씀하신 대로 계절에 대한 궁금증을 많이 가지고 있는데 저희 방역
I am
당국에서는
the head of the NIH and not the head of the KCDC. And we don't really believe that the weather plays a role as to maintaining social distance. The US CDC and they mentioned social distance as 90 centimeters. That's about 3 feet. And this time we look at it as 2 meters. The appropriate social distance. So it's not about the temperature. I think it's about the social atmosphere, the population density and such. So if the weather becomes warmer and if there are more activities outside, then this social distance can further widen. And even for influenza, for example, Hong Kong, even when it became quite warm, the virus actually spread further. So we don't really believe that the weather is a definitive factor in the spread of the virus.
And now from journalists on the left-hand side from the podium, we will first give the microphone over to the journalist in the white shirt. I am Lee Sang-hyun from Russia's Sputnik. To Mr. Kim Dong-hyun, the president of the Korea Society of Epidemiology, I think the level 3 countries all over the world is China, Italy, Iran, and China. So do you see any commonalities between the countries? Any traffic or the medical staff or the health and welfare policies or initial response measures? And if you think about the overall health indexes, do you see any commonalities among the 4 countries? And from for Kim Yeon-jae, Japanese and Chinese media outlets mentioned that there were multiple cases which led to 10,000 deaths with the flu. And some are saying that this is related to COVID-19. So what is the Korean government's stance on this? Do you feel the need to respond to it? And if there are any limits, what can you say about it? So I don't think that the virus is really selective of any countries. It's just spreading all over the world. Around 100 or so countries at least have more than one case, confirmed case of the COVID-19. Why some countries had it first? Well, I guess maybe it was the relations, the traffic, and frequency of the relations with China. But then afterwards, how the outbreak spread in that society and how the country responded, it really depends on the medical institutions and the capability per country. From early detection to containment, we were very strong in that phase. And if you think about Japan, there are many reasons, but there's a shortage of testing kits. And they are only focusing on the patients that show symptoms, and they're caring for those patients. You could say that it's a strategy, but as a result, it just turned out that way. And if you think about it, why and how the COVID-19 was significant in each country, I think we will need some more time before we evaluate. At the moment, it's a bit too early. So the patients from the flu and the relations with COVID-19, fatalities due to viruses, of course, are similar in terms of the conditions. But if you look at the case fatality of COVID-19, I think we need some more time in order to make a fair assessment. From my knowledge, I do not know any kind of direct relationship between the flu and COVID-19.
우선 기자님 하시고
Yes. Yes. Well, good afternoon. I am from ZDF, Germany.
Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. Since this virus is global and it goes beyond borders, what are the plans for the entry of travelers coming into Korea hereafter when the numbers start to decrease in Korea? So I can understand that there is containment and all the different measures being put in place in Korea to contain this. Hereafter, once the numbers start stabilizing, what might be the plans for the foreigners traveling into Korea?
So I briefly mentioned my briefing early on, but the basic direction is not to block entry into Korea. So we do not want to undermine or block the movement across borders. We just want to control or manage the flow, and that has been our consistent policy from the very beginning. The only exception would be Wuhan, Hubei, because that is the source of the virus. And so those coming in from that region have been blocked. But other than that, we have been respecting the voluntary opinions of those who are entering into Korea. And so this can cause some issues in the quarantine measures. So for those who are coming into Korea from specific regions, from the immigration stage, we want to make sure that they are traceable. And so there has been many tools implemented to achieve that. So we have the special immigration process. That's how we call it. So the concept behind that is that when they land, so amid this background at the moment, they must have a very urgent need to travel into Korea. And so we want to respect that. But when they are coming into Korea, we want to make sure that we can track their whereabouts in Korea. And we also want to make sure that they can check their own health conditions. So if there is a need, they can report to the health authorities in Korea. And so those has been established upon landing and immigration. And then currently, China, Hong Kong, Macau, and from today, Japan, those coming in from these countries, their entries or travels are limited. Other than these regions, we would like to respect the freedom of the passengers, but we want to also ensure that they strictly adhere to the health guidelines and instructions of the Korean quarantine authorities. And the health authorities of Korea, for the Korean citizens, if you read the news or if you listen to the news channels, through those type of media outlets, we have been communicating some of the regions that we would like the Korean citizens to refrain from traveling, the more high-risk areas. But the overall policy direction I mentioned earlier is to respect the travel. And that's as to whether we're going to change that policy direction, I think it's very difficult to give you a definitive answer right now. We have to consider various different elements. First of all, we have to look at the COVID-19 status in Korea. And then we have to look at the status in other countries. And we also have to look at their quarantine or infection control ability of those countries. And if we will monitor this situation comprehensively, and based on those analysis, we may change some of the restrictions on travel. But it's very difficult to give you an answer at this point.
다음 질문 받도록 하겠습니다.
So next question, please.
With UPI. This is a question for Mr. Kim Kang-lip. I just wanted to ask quickly about the Shincheonji Church. I feel like there's been some varying accounts of just how much they have cooperated in terms of handing over their members' lists and cooperating with quarantining and testing. So I just wanted to ask you directly, how would you characterize Shincheonji's level of cooperation? And also, do you have a sense of whether there are still large numbers or any members that are refusing to come in for testing or refusing to cooperate with other health regulations? Thank you.
신천지
Related to the Shincheonji Church members, a lot of research has been conducted based on the information delivered by the headquarters of Shincheonji Church. It was a very comprehensive information, the number of their members nationwide, and their personal information, and the location of their church facilities. And there are some who are still in training and they are not yet Shincheonji members, so they are in preparation of becoming Shincheonji church members. So they were actively cooperating with us in handing over the lists, especially the Daegu region. There were widespread contaminations based on the activities in Daegu. So those who participated in the religious activities in Daegu, the information has been handed over, and we were quite aggressive in the research and investigation, even if they were not present at that sermon. The reliability of the information was verified, and through an administrative investigation, we also went into their information systems to verify the information, to double check. So from an overall organization perspective, they are cooperating with us. So as of now, the reliability of the information handed over and the accuracy is still being verified, and we're analyzing the information. So that's where we stand. Once we do verify and check all of the information, the future next steps will be considered. Individually speaking, the epidemiological investigations of the members and the recommendations for treatment and to be allocated in centers, there are some who have not complied, and we are responding based on law.
Next question. So a journalist who have not asked questions yet yes, we have about 20 minutes left. If you have questions, please raise your hands now and we will try to accommodate all of your questions. Yes, a little bit higher, your hands, yes. So total, I think we see 6 journalists, 6 hands. So we will conclude after these 6 questions. So we'll start here and then sequentially move on. So I have a question for Mr. Kwon. So I'm from Japan and my name is Kim Ho-jin. And the Daegu and Gyeongbuk province, I think, is pretty much stabilizing. But in other regions, the infection seems to be spreading. So I would like to listen to your opinion on that. In Seoul and Gyeonggi, there are more than 200 confirmed cases at the moment. So Seoul, Gyeonggi metropolitan area, do you think there will be any possibility of a cluster infection? So in today's briefing, the Vice Minister Kim already mentioned, but also the Prime Minister mentioned as well. As to the Daegu Sincheonji incident, I think we're close to the inflection point. But the concern now is that, like the President Kim Dong-hyun mentioned earlier, there are cases where the epidemiological links cannot be identified. And so this is of the biggest concern at the moment. And then the second is that maybe those clusters maybe cause damage. So any social welfare institutions or long-term care facilities. And so that is why we are emphasizing personal hygiene and maintaining social distance so that we can prevent any additional links to these type of facilities happening. And so we are trying to encourage the participation of the Korean citizens to achieve that, and also monitoring and reporting systems. We want to identify any potential cases early on. So that is why we have distributed the diagnostic tests quite extensively. And we are also conducting those tests very actively for early detection. And so the Daegu Sincheonji cluster, once we do feel is somewhat coming into conclusion, we want to reallocate all of our resources that were centered there to other regions so that we can better identify the progress of the virus spreading. As like you mentioned, Seoul, highly populated, and there may be some population-dense facilities that may cause cluster infection. And so we are very cautious of this from happening at the moment.
Yes, next question, please. So once again, please raise your hand. Yes.
China News Service, and I have 2 questions. The first one is, could you please share some new studies about the virus, like except variation, either any new funds or like new medicine about this virus, and how about the vaccine? And the second question is about a China government said they'd love to cooperate with Korea. And any comments about that? Could you please introduce the cooperation with China or other areas? Thanks.
Related to the treatment of the virus, we have about 4 different types. The Caletra, the malaria treatment, and the Ebola treatment. And if you look at it, we are collaborating with professionals at home and abroad. And we're still in the preparation stages to continue with the development. And with the malaria treatment, there are some professionals who have cited their concerns, and some of them are saying that we need clinical testing. So among the treatments related to existing treatments that have proven to be effective for COVID-19, we are looking at spreading those research. And related to the variations, there are L types and S types that were reported in China. So there are some possibilities that have been cited, but this is not just for Korea, but WHO is also looking at the sequence listing or the sequencing, looking at any variations or changes in the virus. So we are also contributing to the international efforts by providing information and knowledge that we know, and we will cooperate fully. And I think that you are a journalist from China, but President Moon Jae-in, during our March 1st announcement, mentioned cooperation with cross-border nations, and he emphasized the need to cooperate with neighboring countries. And I think it was last February, in the mid of February, when we had a phone call with the summits between Korea and China, we once again emphasized and reiterated the need for cooperation, and there was a consensus made. And even at the working level, in infection control and clinical studies, we are also cooperating. In Korea with the KCDC and the Ministry of Health and Welfare, we're also looking into cooperating with our counterparts. Apart from that, I think it was from Russia, we had some suggestions for cooperation as well. And of course, in the development of vaccines, I think that there will be ties and cooperations down the road. We're also looking into those options. I think in the initial stages with our municipalities and the civic organizations, we also supported other countries and China in providing masks and medical resources. So that is why I believe China is also eager to cooperating with us and supporting us. And I believe that under grave circumstances, we do need to stand together with neighboring countries. And I hope that that also aids to the amicable relations.
So the third journalist out of the 6. So those who you raised hands earlier, the 6 of you, could you please raise your hands again? So currently we have 4. So these 4 questions will be our last 4 questions from the back. The yellow mask. So these 4 hands we will all accommodate.
For newspaper The Straits Times, I have 2 questions. Is there any concern about the growing numbers of small cluster infections, such as at hospitals, non-Shincheonji churches, and even like Zumba class? Are these under control? Can you also predict how long it will take for Korea to be COVID-19 free totally?
So as to your first question, so we are concerned and we have measures and policies to prevent that from happening, like mentioned earlier. And from Gyeonggi and North Gyeongsang province, the local governments there especially have been managing and controlling the staff who work there. And we recommend that the temperature control is in place there, the temperature surveillance. So for those who enter those type of facilities, so if you have symptoms, we have been campaigning to the entire public of Korea to stay home, but especially for those who work at more vulnerable organizations. If you have a fever, we have been campaigning to stay at home, and we have been especially recommending that those temperature control devices and measures are in place in those facilities. And so we want to minimize any such cases, especially in medical institutions like you mentioned, from happening. And then as to your second questions, we have our situation in Korea, but we're also very interested in international cooperation. And because just managing this in Korea cannot really minimize the damage in Korea. So we need to work together with countries all over the world. And you can see it is spreading quite quickly in other countries at the moment. And as recommended by WHO and as mentioned by Second Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs today, we have put in place special immigration processes for passengers coming into Korea. But one country alone cannot overcome the coronavirus. It is also very closely linked to the global trends of the virus spreading, and we need to closely monitor, therefore, the trends in other countries and also strengthen international cooperation.
네, 기자님.
Yes, the journalist in the front row. Hello, I am from Taiwan. I'm Yang Jae-hyuk, and I would like to ask Ms. Oh Hyun-ju. And even in Taiwan, they are reporting on the mask issue in Korea. At first, the government mentioned that they were going to produce around 14 million masks, but if you look at the FP filters, they're in shortage. And under such circumstances, I believe that a lot of people are saying that it's difficult to reach this number. So how are you going to secure these filters? And secondly, a few days ago, a mask producer called Edent was mentioned. If you look at it, they stopped production, but they also resumed the production of the masks today. Why have these problems occurred, and how are you going to address them? So, as the Director General of Medical Devices, I can't control all of these together. But related to the mask production, we are working in multifacets to provide the mentioned number.
네, 다음 질문 받겠습니다.
Next question, second row. Yes, sorry, third row. So good afternoon. I'm from LA Times. My name is Victoria Kim. I have questions for Mr. Yu. You said that the Korean testing results are based on conservative criteria. And are you comparing it to US or any other European country? How can you compare it with other countries? And we talked about false negative earlier. So there can be some errors. What is the rate of errors in those testing results? So when I mentioned conservative results, so this is a kit that has been approved temporarily for emergency situations. So the government is taking responsibility here. And so it's not an official approval. And so therefore, as to reading the results, we are being very conservative. We have some values, criteria, but we have a plus-minus gray zone, and we verify in 3 stages, first, second, and third. And when those results are determined, the experts in diagnostic testing are making those decisions. And the WHO, CDC, ECDC, and Australia, Canada authorities, they all use real-time RT-PCR. So they all strongly recommend this method. If you go to WHO homepage, as to other methods, they say not yet available. So everyone is using the same method. And for Korea, the WHO method is modified in Korea. The basic is the same, but the details can be adopted or verified by the different countries that adopt the method. And so we are using the modified version recommended by WHO, and the results, the criteria for determining the results, we work very closely with the medical experts, and we have a very conservative approach to that. And you talked about false positive and false negative, but as you all know, testing can depend on the condition of the patient, the sample collection, and the type of virus. So it can be impacted by various elements, and then as to positive, negative, and also invalid results can come out. So like I mentioned earlier, the kit has been approved, but as to using that kit, we are consulting closely with the KCDC and the medical experts. So testing, leading, and interpreting. Testing, reading, and interpretation. These three stages are being implemented, and we have very conservative approach for these each stages. And when if there is an invalid case, it goes to the KCDC, but there has not been a result that has been overturned. And just to add to that, the Ministry of Food and Drug and Safety is also managing the emergency approval system. As of March 9th, we have been 18 kits that have been submitted for approval, and we have approved 4 of them. And so we are also reviewing currently 46 as well. And so February 4th was the first emergency approval happened. And we worked with the WHO International Forum and 10 other countries, and we provided this type of information to all of them.
And last question, please. I am Nam Seung-jo from MBC Broadcasting. First of all, I would like to know the hospitals and drive-thrus in Seoul, the current number in Seoul, and we also heard through our briefing that there may be a penalty of 10 million or less. So is this actually in compliance with the new, the coronavirus Article 3, or is it a new development in terms of the legal penalties? Yes, from the second question, I'd like to answer first. If there are any false accounts, I think that is punishable under current law. The penalty can be as up to 10 million won. And as for the amended COVID-19 law, which goes into effect April 5th, that will be a little bit reinforced in terms of not responding to epidemiological investigations. Then you will be issued with a fine or a penalty, a stronger measure. And as for the facilities in Seoul, if they falsely report on where they have been, that is actually punishable by the existing current law. Related to the drive-through numbers, we have to verify the exact numbers. But from what I know, we have about 50 stations for drive-through nationwide. So we will conclude the Q&A session here. If there are any other comments from our participants, the panels. Yes, we do not have any other comments. We will close the briefing with this. Thank you once again for your participation. And we have a lot of journalists here, so we will have our panelists exit first, and then we will have our journalists exit the room. Thank you very much.